If you don't know how to do an investigation, you can call somebody. Faced with some tactical situation, you can't call anybody.
Our city was #1 for robbery, for aggravated robbery of a commercial business. The volley was pretty much like boom, boom, boom. Luckily, I came out on top.
118 soldiers, family alone. I can't copy. Family alone. We got crews coming.
This is Surviving the Streets Podcast, Episode 5. I will be interviewing an active law enforcement officer of 16 years, and we will be discussing some of his experiences as a police officer with particular attention focused on his officer-involved shootings. This shouldn't be of any surprise if you're a follower of the Instagram at @kinetic_concepts_group or the YouTube channel at @kinetic_concepts_group, as you are very familiar with my interest in the details surrounding these events. Real quick, I've had a lot of questions about classes through the TTPOA, and I told you I would address that. There will be no classes, at least for the rest of this year, and I will learn more about the future of classes in January of 2024. I will say that the feedback from my classes have been great. Every student that I have had has enjoyed the experience, and I haven't had any issues filling classes. At the last conference, we trained mostly SWAT officers, some of which liked the course so much that they were interested in teaching the curriculum to other officers at their department. We had submitted to be part of the next conference as well, but again, we'll have more info on that in January of 2024. I believe what we have to offer is unlike most of what you will find out there. We provide simunition courses catered to every proactive officer, regardless of their title, at a lower cost where all the equipment is provided. I don't want cops to feel like they can't train because they don't have the equipment, or they don't want to pay $800 for the course, or the course isn't open to regular cops, if you want to call them that. Our courses are scenario-based and directly catered to the highest probability situations where you are likely to find yourself involved in an engagement. I'm in the business of saving lives, and I can't think of anything more valuable than affording officers the opportunity to go home to their wives and kids. One way or another, this is what I was called to do, and classes will resume in time. Be on the lookout for another announcement in January of 2024. If you are new to the podcast or you haven't quite been following along, I encourage you to listen to Episode 4 if you haven't already, either before or after this podcast, in order to assist in adding more context for my passion on the subject of officer-involved shootings. This is the first of many conversations of this type, and the purpose here is not to glorify the event for the purposes of seeking accolades or affirmation. The purpose is to provide you, the listener, with the best information possible surrounding these events so that you can formulate your own thoughts and opinions, which should assist in making good decisions, whether it be tactical, gear, investigation, or personal development related. The individual involved can more clearly speak to the facts and circumstances surrounding the event, and it is also the person who can speak intimately about what they saw, how they felt, and oftentimes the details of the scene itself. Before I start the instructional portion of my classes, exploiting accuracy to be more specific, I have a conversation about honesty. And what I tell the students is that in order for me to gather and provide the best information, it requires honesty from them. I preemptively get out in front with that conversation because I want the students to understand that it isn't just about them. Although they are there to get better, their information will assist everyone around them and those who come after. These conversations usually happen behind closed doors, and from experience, I can tell you, sometimes individuals aren't honest for various reasons. Again, I would refer you to Episode 4 to help paint a better picture of that. If I talk to an officer about their experiences and I don't feel like I am getting honest answers, then it won't develop into an interview. If for whatever reason I do an interview and I don't feel like I am getting honest answers, I just won't publish it. Publishing anything other than the best I can do or the most correct information I can find compromises the entire purpose of Kinetic Concepts Training Group and Surviving the Street podcast. John Calhoun is an active law enforcement officer of 16 years in a large metropolitan area. John began his career as a patrol officer in 2007, where he spent 8 years on patrol before transitioning to a tactical team where he spent another 8 years. John has been involved in 3 officer-involved shootings. 2 of those occurred in 2014, and 1 of which John was shot. Today, we are going to discuss 2 of those engagements, the third of which is highlighted in a book called The Sniper, Hunting a Serial Killer, which is an almost unbelievable true story which speaks very detailed about John's time on the tactical team. John, thanks for coming on the podcast, and thanks for having the willingness to have this conversation with me today.
No, I appreciate you having me, Brad.
So, as I already discussed, these conversations amongst men are almost never easy conversations, and this is just kind of one of many issues surrounding, finding the best information possible, tactics, etc. So me and John have what I would call the pleasure of working together now.
Yeah.
I guess any day above ground is
A good day.
yeah, it's a good day. So, as you were telling me, John, you know, you've been on the department for 16 years, or is it 16, right?
Yeah, right at 16 in June is when I hit. So.
And so, at what age did you join the department? Probably young, I'd bet.
Yeah, so I was. I always make the joke that it's a family business. Both my parents were police officers, and so I, joined early. Joined at 20, turned 21 in the academy. Even my dad had to buy my pistol, so I was that early in the game. So but like I said, my mom started. I think she was 19 and turned 20, because back in the 80s you could join even earlier. So.
What was the criteria at the time to become a police officer? It used to be military, and it used to be or military or college education of some kind?
Yeah, you had to have 60 hours of college at the time, and that's exactly what I had. Played college basketball for a year and got tired of getting hurt, and it was like, all right, I'll come back home. And then, it was either have, 60 hours college degree, or military history.
What were you going to college for?
Criminal justice. So.
Did you ever finish it?
No, that's what I still promised my mom and my wife. I'll go back one day. So we'll see.
So you had enough credits to join basically at the time.
Yeah, it was right at the cutoff.
And what did your parents do on the department?
My dad was he patrolled at the same station as me back in the 70s. He came on in 73 to 78, and then at 78 he joined homicide and then retired out of homicide. He was a homicide detective for, I think it was like 28 years out of a 34-year career. And then my mom's even crazier, and she did part of her career was in auto theft, and then I say the first half was in a division called major offenders. I always kind of say, like, if the mayor's house got broken into and they wanted somebody to investigate it, they'd send somebody from major offenders, and that's where she kind of, they kind of do a little bit of everything there. And then she finished out her career in auto theft at 39 years.
So you said family business, right?
Yeah.
And you actually have your own child on the way, right?
Yeah. So wife just hit 6 months, so we got a baby due January. So.
And I don't know if you can tell if you're watching this or not. Probably not, because it's not a good demonstration. But comparison, should I say, is that how tall are you?
6'6". Yeah.
Yeah. 6'6", saying you're 6'6", and standing next to somebody who is 6'6", I feel like are two different things. But we were on a scene the other day, and I didn't tell this to you, but John was talking to me, and I was like, I actually have to look up to talk to him. And I tell people I'm 5'6", because saying 5'5" and 3/4 is just a lot. It's, so, and it's closer to 5'6", so I get away with that.
That's why it's funny you say always be honest about everything. And so my honest part of it was being, I always made a joke back when I was in the academy. Is I was 6'6", like 190, but I always, people are like, you're built like a girl, and I'd be like, well, I'm pretty swole for Dakota Fanning, so
yeah.
But
exactly.
No, I was a string bean back in the day.
Oh really? So you put on some weight?
Yeah. So that's what it is. The going thing is, like, I get out on the street and all of a sudden I'm like, man, why am I getting my butt tossed around so much? And I was like, I need to eat some more peanut butter and jellies. So.
That's what it is right there, all the protein. So before the academy, you got out of high school, you went into college, and you had a scholarship, you said?
No, just it was like a minor school. It was a little D3 school out in Belton. It's called Mary Hardin Baylor. Played there for a year, and I had just bad ankles the last half of my high school career and then first half of college, and I was just like, I'm over it.
You had good references, right? So it was easier track for you to maybe get over here and get on the department.
Yeah, and that's what, and I when that came about, I was at a community college nearby, and it was like career day or whatever. The department I joined eventually, they were out there for career day, and so it was just kind of funny that they happened to be there, and I was like, you know what? Both my parents are on the department, and I think I'm gonna join. They were like, yeah, it's a good idea, and then when I came home, told my mom, I was like, hey, I actually got all the paperwork for the department. She was like, you did what? And I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to join. She's like, you're not going to finish school? And I was like, well, I mean,
maybe.
I'll see. I was like, they sold me on it, and they said, they were like, hey, you can always go back, and the department will help fund it, and da-da-da, if you have a good enough grades and all this. And I was like, yeah, so why not that? And here I am 16 years later, and I'm still like, I swear I'll go back.
So was, growing up in a family where your mom and dad are the cops.
Yeah.
Is it something that, you were going for criminal justice, so I assume that was maybe your goal anyways, was to go, right?
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny. Like a month ago, I was, my mom's, she's like getting baby ready. And so now it's like she's starting to prep stuff for the grandbaby. And so she actually had like some of my old school books and stuff. And one of them I was looking through, and I don't even remember this, but I like wrote in like blue crayon, and it was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wrote in there like police officer. I think I was like 6 years old. And so I was just like, well, I guess I had my mindset pretty young. So
yeah, something that I Op-Tempo Training Group, if you're not familiar with who that is, you can go follow him on Instagram. But I was on the first podcast I ever did, actually, was with him, and I talked about the inception of like what drove me to policing. And I have a similar story in the sense of it was, I get whatever that paper is you got to write your senior year of high school, like what you want to do. And I wrote on there, and I still have it actually. It was like, I'm going to go into the Marine Corps, do my 4 years, get out, become a police officer. And I said, be an FTO, all right? Because I liked teaching, or, I knew I wanted to teach people. But then, after getting here and realizing kind of what that job actually is in a sense, I was like, maybe not the best thing.
Yeah.
So I decided that that's probably just not going to be something that I do. A little bit too much labor intensive for me. So in the academy 16 years ago, that was a completely different department, I would assume. Right?
Yeah.
Different leadership, different everything, right?
Yeah, it was
different uniforms even.
Yeah, we were still in the old school baby blues, and before everybody started, I think that's kind of nationwide. Everybody's transitioning to kind of that darker color, but yeah, it was, and even in the academy, I remember, they were like, these are corporal stripes. This means that you have a police officer on your scene that's going to be considered a senior police officer. So and then we were still cadets, and I was just like, what's a senior police officer? So I was like, now I realize it just means you're getting old, but yeah.
It's just a clear indication you've been on for a while.
Yeah, so that's all that meant. But while I was in the academy is when they introduced that, and it wasn't as like grueling, I should say, as like some people imagine an academy to be. I was a college athlete, so I just kind of jumped into it, and I was just like, I was thinking more militaristic, and so I was just kind of like, this isn't as hardcore as I thought it'd be. But then when it came to like the books side of stuff, I was like, I wasn't really a straight A student, so that's where it was like the books were actually what gave me kind of a hard time. But as far as like running and stuff, and then now I see the academy now, and I'm like, oh, they're like cranking it out. Like it seems like the last couple of years they've really upped the pace. So.
Well, the academic portion isn't hard either, okay, people. So let's the fact of the matter is John didn't want to put in the work. Okay.
Yeah. I was that's where I was like, I was like, when are we ever going to read a book as a police officer? I was like, I'm going to go drive cars. And granted, like I'm 20-year-old, 21-year-old, like, and I was very immature for my wife even says now that I'm still just a giant child and 37 years old, but being me at 21, I'm like, dude, I was like, you're not gonna read a book as a cop. And then like I was like, you're gonna be driving and shooting and all that other stuff. So that's just what I was better at. I put more effort into, and then all of a sudden I was like, I need to read some books.
Yeah, the paperwork, not since the paperwork, but the book portion kind of gets you there.
Yeah, definitely.
And make sure you're doing everything within the lines, should we say.
Yeah, exactly.
And 16 years ago, and I don't know who was kind of at the academy running it or even involved at that time, and I can only speak to 8 years ago, kind of when I was going through there, and even now it's different, and it's better, right? It's some of the, what is it, officer safety or whatever they call it. At the time, 8 years ago, nobody was happy with that. And I think they saw that. School. Yeah, I think they saw that, and they made right changes for the better. So it's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it was better when I was there than when you were, and I'm sure it's better now. And I think that's just a progression. That's how it should be. They should continuously try to improve that.
Mm-hmm.
So in the academy, you go through, and everything that you do in the academy is a test, should we say? Different skills: driving, shooting, academics, and what is there? Physical fitness, right?
Yeah.
So all of these things that you do get added up to an overall score, right? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you remember how many cadets were there in your class at the time, and where did you kind of fall into that?
Yeah, so it's kind of like right where I wanted to be, pretty much smack dab in the middle. I think we started with like 68 or something like that, and then finally by the time we were done, it was 60, and then I was number 30. So, high on the driving and shooting portion, physical fitness, things like that, but a little bit lower on the academic portion. And a lot of that is just, that was a majority of me. It's not because it was like they want you to get a doctorate in criminal justice or anything. It was just, that was definitely my fault. I was not persistent.
And how does the way that you rank at the end of the academy affect, does it affect anything? How does that work exactly?
Yeah, so that's what I actually had a ride along the other day, and she asked the same question, and I was like, dude, from day one, I was like, you're basically in a competition. And because even when my dad went to retire, it was basically like, well, who can retire first kind of situation, because who he graduated, it's like there was something that was going on with his retirement, but they went back and looked like at academy scores and like who graduated ahead or something. I forgot what it was, but I was like, man, they went back and like looked at that. And so I always tell people, it's like, yeah, when you're in the academy, like you're always wanting to, because essentially it comes down to like where you're going to pick your station and seniority wise and things like that. So always try to strive to be in the top tier. And I didn't realize that until we were picking our stations. And then they were like, oh, okay. I trained in kind of a very mellow area. And then all of a sudden when they picked our station, all those spots were picked up. And then I was like, wait. And they were like, well, the first 29 people already got them. So when it came to me, I was like, where am I going? And then.
So how do they pick stations exactly? Or how do they decide how many spots are available where, and then they just go down the list? Or?
Yeah, it was kind of like a manpower thing. It was weird because the station I trained at, like I said, it was pretty mellow, and they accepted, X amount of probationary police officers to train there. And I was expecting it was like, oh, okay, it's going to be the same number whenever we pick our permanent assignments. And then when it got to picking, there were some other guys that trained at other stations, and they were like, that were ahead of me in the class, and they were like, oh no, we're gonna go there too. And I was like, wait, you didn't train there? Like, so can you do that? And I'm just kind of like, oh man, like I should have been studied a little harder and got ahead. But in the end, like I always say, everything happens for a reason, and it worked out. But yeah, it's they pick according to manpower at that moment, department wide, on how many now that you're off of probation and you're picking your first permanent assignment. It's like, okay, this is where our manpower's at, and this is where every station gets X amount.
I can't remember. Do they do that also off of training when you're going to train? Like, you're not picking your actual station. Do they do that the same way? Do you pick a station to train and then you pick a station to go to?
Yeah. So like in the academy, they were like, I think it was according to rank as well. I think we'd already gotten we were pretty much like said and done, and it was like the last week. And I think they were like, pick the top 3 stations where you want to go. And of course you want to go to like according to where you live, on what side of town and stuff. So there was people that were, if like somebody like me, I'm kind of middle of the road, as far as graduation wise. And it was like, okay, well, you probably won't get your first pick, so maybe your second pick, or somebody who's a little lower on the ladder, they might end up getting their third pick or something like that. So in the academy, it's like that's how you picked your training station, and then fast forward another 6 months, and then that's how you pick your permanent assignment.
I would say from a proactive standpoint, well, if you're in a major city, there's probably enough work for you to find regardless of where you go. You could find the same stuff in that location as you can in the other, but I think maybe the difference would be in terms of the types of calls that you might go to. Similar, but level of seriousness maybe not be,
Yeah.
there as other locations may be having, aggravated assaults or aggravated robberies way more frequently than others. And then if you go to a patrol station where you train because you didn't study and you
Yeah.
ended up in a location where those kind of things aren't really necessarily common. And then you go to you pick a station to where they are, or you end up there eventually, you'll figure it out, but it would have been helpful
Yeah.
had somebody been there to talk you through it and walk you through it.
Yeah.
And to that, my biggest thing always when talking with people that newer cops or want to be cops, and they ask me like what to focus on, and you have to be good at all the things, but I think the most important thing is safety and tactics, because if you don't know how to do an investigation, you can call somebody and they will tell you how to do it. So when you're faced with some tactical situation, you can't call anybody.
Yeah,
you
gotta
gotta
handle it right there.
You gotta figure it out. So keep that in mind and maybe use that if you feel like you need to do that. So you were on patrol for about 8 years.
Yeah, it was from 2008 to 2000. So, yeah, started the academy in 07, graduated January of 08, and then started the streets January of 08, and then all the way to 2014.
2014. And then in 2014, you transitioned to a tactical team?
Yeah, February of 15 is when I transitioned to that tactical unit.
And did you say you tried out several times for that? Or
Yeah,
put in
yes.
several times, I should say? Because there's no tryouts, right? Really?
Yeah, it's like an application process. So it's kind of the unique thing about the department is that anytime you want to go somewhere other than just a patrol station, they're going to want to basically do like a full-blown job interview. You send in a writing sample. They look at your shooting scores, just your work ethic. They call around, ask your supervisors, hey, how's this guy, and things like that. And so then you kind of turn in a packet, and then they call you in front of a panel and that kind of stuff. So I applied twice. I think I got it. I got it the second time, I think. Maybe a third. I can't remember now. But, yeah, there was multiple applications.
You were probably too intimidating, honestly.
Yeah, that's it.
They're like, I got to look at this guy every day. I can't do that. So when you started patrol, what was your mentality as a new officer? And did you have a partner? And what was it you guys frequently did, or what were you trying to get into?
Yeah, so our area was like I said, I trained at a pretty mellow station and kind of hitting on what you said earlier as far as like you could go out and you could go hunt, but it's just like not really a target-rich environment, and not saying that you couldn't find it, but it was just a little bit harder, and so really wasn't too much proactive work on that side of things. Well, then I get transferred to a newer station, and I remember, I've been there for like a year or two, something like that. And this guy comes in, he's all, hot and ready. And he's just like, hey man, how do I, where can I get some felonies? And I was like, bro, step outside and throw a dart. And he's just like, what? And I was like, they're going to send you to him. And I was like, so it was a very high call volume, high pace, station. And so that was kind of like, they just sent me from one extreme to the other. And, so there, it was pretty cool, man. Since we were like considered a storefront or a substation, we actually just kind of all took care of our own. It was like no matter what, there was always people checking by on your scenes, or any that you weren't really going by on stuff by yourself, just because it was such kind of high call volume, high intensity. And you never really knew what kind of call you were going to get. So I had a couple of older guys that took me under the wing. Here I am, a year on, and they've got 4, 5, 6 years on, and so they were kind of showing me how things were done up there in that area. And then finally, it was like ended up. I think I had maybe 3 or 4 years on where I finally ended up getting partnered up just with a female officer, and just me and her freaking hit it off. She was hilarious and had ADD like none other like me, and like we just vibed off each other really well as far as like work wise, handling a scene. Our partnership we were awesome, and we're still great friends to this day. But yeah, that really just kind of lucked out. Like, it was just like, hey, Calhoun, you're riding with so and so, and it was like, oh, okay. And then the next day I was like, hey man, that was fun yesterday. You want to ride again? It's like, yeah, sure. And then that turned into a 5.5-year partnership.
Nice. I talked about different types of officers, and I guess it would be episode 3, maybe 2. But, being in a car with somebody you enjoy being in the car with and experiencing these things that most people never see, and then being able to, talk with that person well after the fact, like, hey, remember that time? And it's just like it's something that is very unique, I would say. And it's just, you get to build a relationship with that person, and hopefully that person adds value, to the partnership in terms of policing, and maybe they are good at something that you are not. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, if you said that you weren't really into academics, I assume she did a lot of typing.
Yeah, it was kind of a little bit of both. That was what was good, is that we would trade off on stuff and things like that. But I was like majority driving and things like that, and she would just and she was also really good at I was kind of the muscle. She was the verbal judo, and she was really good at it. But then again, she was born and raised in the area where we patrolled. So if you set her off, it was one of those where she'd be like, Calhoun, get him. And I'm like, sorry, dude. Like, you made her mad. And like, so that's why, people are kind of like, I've worked with people in the past that are just straight up just like, and it irks me to no end, man, when I hear somebody say like, oh, female officers are not supposed to be out on the streets or whatever. And I'm like, dude, not only was my mom a hardcore police officer, I was like, I rode with a female officer for 5 years, and dude, I would let her go toe to toe with, I'd say 90% of the guys that I've met out there. So it was really, really cool to just be able to, like you said, just have a fun relationship. There was plenty of times where we were like wiping tears out of our eyes because we were, laughing, and we're just like, we're getting paid to do this right now. Like, so we had a lot of fun together. I ended up introducing her to one of my good friends there at the station, ended up being my best friend, and out there on the department, and they ended up getting married, have a kid together now, so I'm still married to this day. So it's really cool how kind of a, hey, did Calhoun just ride with somebody to the point where like you're now like their daughter comes up and is like, Uncle John, and gives you a hug. So that's really cool how life throws it at you.
Exactly. And you talked about female cops and male cops. I'm not really privy to necessarily what people say about female cops or anything. But let's be honest, male cops are failing more than female cops, because male cops are typically putting them, the human nature is that they're putting themselves out there more in these positions, which means that the likelihood of you failing or making a mistake or making a poor decision is higher.
Yeah.
So that's one way to look at it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
You dudes are failing more than they are, okay? Whether or not they're doing it or whatever is another thing. But I think that leads into, regardless of who you are, male, female, height, weight, whatever, is understanding your capabilities, right? And, I talked about previously about, the interest of every cop is not to go after the bad guy necessarily, in terms of being directly proactive, nonstop or whatever. And if that's not you, then just understand your capabilities and make good decisions, because if you're not doing that thing, which no one's saying you do or you don't have, you have to or you don't have to do that, but understand what your capabilities are, and don't get yourself in over your head on something. And just a quick story, and be as vague as possible, but I was responding to a call that was a code 1, which means lights and sirens. It was a domestic deal. And the officer who arrived before me got there, and initially what it was said to me was, I'm talking to the male outside, and the female is inside, and she's barricaded, and she had thrown stuff all over the house, and she was screaming. So when I arrived, I pulled up and I looked down. Well, I didn't really know where the officer was, but I saw her car. So I pulled up and I looked, and I got out of my car and then I realized, oh, she walked all the way down this long driveway. And since she said the female was barricaded, I was like, okay, well, let me get my car and bring it down here. We might need it for cover or something. And by the time I get to my car, start driving it forward, I see that the officer had walked inside the residence, with the male to confront the female. And I was just like, what? And that's a tactical decision that you can make a better decision in that situation. Say, my backup is right here. He's coming. I'm going to wait until I have to go in here. And so I ran up the stairs and got to the door, and the female is acting, out there, and she's throwing stuff and she's screaming and yelling, and she's in the corner across the living room from the officer, and she's yelling at, the suspect, if you will. And she's trying to get on the radio, and you can't even hear what she's saying because the suspect's yelling so loud.
Yeah.
And the female officer starts to go for a taser, and long story short, I end up just walking up, kind of handcuffing the female. But that's not really understanding your capabilities. And in that situation like that, you have the opportunity to make better decisions. And time, distance, and numbers. Nothing is driving you to get in there right this second. So my backup's right here. We're going to wait and then make contact. So it's a little short story on that, understanding what your capabilities are.
Yeah.
So you said for 5 years you worked with her?
Yeah, like five and a half, somewhere in there.
And then she left and you stayed?
No, then that's when August of 2014 occurred. And from that, I was kind of in the wind a little bit until I got picked up by that tactical unit in February of 15.
So would you say at the time, and I guess that 5 year period from 2007 and forward, were you more call oriented, or were you more proactive, traffic stops and jumping out on people, or was it a mixture of both, or were you even able to do one or the other based on whatever was happening at the time?
Yeah, and that's what made it fun. It was just kind of like, back then it was just like, what do you want to do today? Like, it's just like, you want to chill underneath the shade tree, you want to, just run calls. You want to go out and maybe, go get into some stuff. And that's kind of the vibe that me and her both had. It was like, oh, okay, let's see what we can do. Majority, I'd say we just ran calls just because it was a high call volume area. And that's what made it fun too, is just, it's like, hey, but we never, really stayed stationary. Like, we were always kind of driving around, looking around, seeing stuff, and just, if we saw something right there in front of our face and it was like, hey, that guy just ran that red light, let's light him up. It's not like we set up on a dope corner or, tried to do any of that stuff. It was all pretty even. But that's what was also good about it, is like, sometimes you'll find yourself, riding with somebody and they're like, well, I like to just, sit here and do my reports and whatever. And which is fine, and that's cool, but that's where me and her worked so well together. It's just like, what do you want to do today? And it's like, oh, okay, let's do this. All right, I'm fine with that. Like, you have a headache or whatever, or I'm not feeling too hot either. Like, let's just chill, and then tomorrow we may go and get into some mess. But most of the time in that area is like, if you ran a call, you were getting into something anyways. Like, you didn't really have to go hunt too heavy.
Right. So for those who maybe don't know, we say calls for service or calls is a 911 call that comes in. It could be for literally anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, so I had one the other day. It was 10 head of cattle were out of the pen. And it was like, really? I didn't know we called 911 for that. So.
Yeah, that's a traffic hazard, man.
Yeah, no, that's a little rodeo. So.
Is that how it came down, traffic hazard too?
Yeah, I think there's a couple calls on it, but yeah, it's essentially, it's not my first time having a little rodeo, little police car rodeo, but yeah, it's like, so you can have that, or you can have all the way to, shooting in progress.
Yeah, which I'll kind of get to something else that happened that day, just to put it in perspective on how a day could go. Okay.
Yeah.
But calls, 911, calls for service, someone calls 911, a call taker takes the call, sends that call to the correct dispatcher. And again, I'm talking about large metropolitan area. I don't know, it could be different in other places. So I actually think in smaller towns, the call taker is the dispatcher usually, probably.
I think so.
But then the dispatcher gets the call, and she either dispatches an officer if they're available, which is not frequent,
Yeah.
Or she puts it on, we call it the board, which is simply a, mobile data terminal computer, and, you check the calls and you can see a list of calls that are waiting to be responded to. And like I said, they can be The high priority calls go first. So any code 1s or code 2s, and then 3, 4s, and 5s, could be a report or something that isn't necessarily urgent. So, and on any given day, arriving at work, depending on what shift you work, we'll just go with evenings or nights. You could get to work and there could be anywhere from 12 to 20 calls holding from the previous shift or currently dropping. That is, you get in your car and it's you just start going, and there's a lot of work to be done on going to calls in terms of selecting a call and going, and then going to the next call. Whether the call turns out to be anything is something else. But I say that because the other side of being a patrol officer in a large metropolitan area is being proactive. And, patrol officers don't usually have the opportunity to dedicate to being proactive. And that's why there's other, not divisions, but units that are selected to do that part of the job, because there's just so many calls. And actually, a lot of the time, if you decide to be proactive as a patrol officer in terms of, let me go out of my way to stop this car, let me go out of my way to go over to the store and check on it, when there's 15 calls holding, you're kind of handicapping the other cops that are on the street that are running calls, because now there's one less cop to run the call. Neither one is wrong. It's just a little bit of a perspective. And that's why that mentality of what you were talking about, where you would run your calls, and if you saw something that needed to be addressed, you would address it. I think that's a really good, as a patrol cop, I think that's a really good kind of way to look at doing it, because you're being effective with, being a good team player with the other cops in the beat or the area, but you're also not letting everything just, putting your blinders on and let everything just go by you. And, reports can take anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what's involved in that, getting the information, entering everything in, which seems like is becoming a much longer process. I'm sure it was not as long when you were on. Actually, it was a completely different system, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a completely different system. And then also just like, me being in a proactive, tactical unit for the last 8 years, and now coming back recently onto the streets, and it's just like an 8-year break, and I'm just like, holy cow, has things changed as far as like, the amount of detail that they want in some of these reports and charges, and I'm just like, kind of like, holy cow, man. Like back in the day, you could almost, you could easily crank out 2 arrests and report and charges in a shift, 8-hour shift, and now it's like, made an arrest the other day, and it was almost like an OD, off, I was going to be off duty on that call, like getting it at like 3, and I, OD at 10, and I'm just like, dude, this thing's wild. So it's definitely a change for me.
Yeah. So I had a break from patrol, but it wasn't as long. I don't even know. 5 years, maybe. I'll just say, throw a number out there, about 5 years. But the technology and the systems hadn't changed a whole lot for me, because at least in some of the duties I was doing on the team still involved me accessing some of those systems. So I was familiar with it. And not all tactical teams are built the same. They all have the same capabilities, I should say, in terms of what they could be doing. But, what they are doing is dependent on a bunch of other different factors. But when you went to the tactical team, what was your primary responsibility? And did that change as you started from when you left, do you think?
Yeah. A majority of tactical teams across our city, they all kind of have specialties in regards to like their area. So when I first went over there in February of 15, that year and the following couple years, so essentially what we found out was that our city was number one in the entire United States for robbery, for aggravated robbery of a commercial business. We found out that not only that, but the north side of our city was also number one in the area. And so we were just kind of like, okay, so for any other major city on the list. I think we blew them out by like 800 or 900 robberies, aggravated robberies of commercial businesses. So we teamed up with federal unit ATF as well as FBI, and we were able to start addressing the robbery issue. And so that just became our bread and butter. It was just we kind of got forged in the fire. It wasn't like that was our plan or anything. It was just kind of like, man, robberies are through the roof. Like we were having, a couple a shift, and it wasn't like, it was like full blown. We, call them crews, robbery crews, and it's, anywhere from 2 to 5 would go into a commercial business and conduct an aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. And so they were very serious, very violent. And so that became our specialty when I got over there. And from that, we slowly started, developing our tactics, just like anything with the department. Back in the, when my dad came on, they all had the Dirty Harry special, 44 mag, revolver, and now we've evolved and we've learned that the tactics and things like that and the equipment has all changed. So that was kind of, same thing for us. The equipment changed, the tactics changed, and we kind of created a system that helped us tackle that problem. And
I mentioned already about different divisions per se, focusing their tasks in different areas, because one team can only focus really wholeheartedly on maybe one thing or a couple things. And if, say, the tactical team isn't addressing robberies or auto thefts or whatever it is they're addressing, well, then maybe nobody's addressing it. And so that leads back into the patrol thing. It's like, you're on patrol and you have these calls, and if you're not running the calls, then nobody's running the calls. Mm-hmm. And probably, definitely when you were on, but there used to be warrant execution teams. Mm-hmm. Were those at all the stations? Was that something that you maybe had thought about being a part of, or?
Yeah, when I originally applied for the tactical team, there was 2 spots open, and I think one was with the warrant team and one was with the tactical team. And I remember the sergeant at the time over the warrant team was like, "Well, you don't want to come over here to us?" And I was like, "Well, that's all y'all do is run warrants." And I was like, it's just, and nothing knocking those guys. They're great at their job. They're fantastic. I think at the time, there might have been 2 stations total that were doing it across the city, but I know for sure ours was number 1 as far as execution warrants and how many they were doing and everything. But it was just like, that's not, like I said, I have ADD like a ferret on crack. So I'm just like, oh no, I can't do like one thing daily. So that was a good thing, was that the tactical team kind of, addressed several different issues through a regular work week. And so that's what kind of drew me to them. And then it wasn't until I got over there was when all of a sudden the robbery issue kicked off within, 6 months later. And then that's when we were like, okay, we need to change our tactics again, and let's see how we can handle this problem.
And so from your time starting on the team to, when you left, did kind of what they were focusing their attention on change a whole lot, or were they doing anything differently? Has, whether it was needs of the department or, crime changing or whatever the case is, are they paying particular attention elsewhere?
Yeah, so they, like I said, when I first got on the team, it was just, let's get our crack rocks, let's go undercover, do our couple of prostitution cases, and that'll be our day. During this month, my tactical unit went out there in the city and they produced X amount of, felony arrests. And, depending on the prostitution case or the drug, it'd be a felony arrest. Well, luckily, my supervision at the time, because like I said, my dad patrolled the same area that I did, and there was a, intersection that it was the same way in 1973 as it was in 2015. And it's just like, that's, kind of the argument that we had. We're like, nothing's going to change. Like, this will always be there. Mm-hmm. So that's where, when the robbery game started getting really, really amped up, that's when we were kind of like, okay, I feel like we can make a difference here. Like we were, because we were teamed up with the federal side of things, that's what transitioned us really hot and heavy, was that we were no longer getting stateside charges. We were now getting federal offenses. And we'd have ATF agents come into our office and be like, "Good job, boys! Y'all put them away for 120 years." And we were just like, "Just say life. Just why?" So that's their thing. Is these guys would 116 years. And we're like, "Okay, so
forever
life, like we got it." So that was kind of cool to no longer be handling a quote unquote problem that's been around since my dad was a rookie. That it was now something we could address, and we knew we were putting guys away for good, and it was like, man, that was a really good feeling.
Yeah, I think if I remember learning this correctly, when I got my bachelor's in criminal justice, that there's a couple different, I think there's only two actually, but I'm just going to talk about one, a philosophy in reducing crime in an area, and that is addressing the crime in a way in which it is no longer, the person no longer has the ability to commit the crime in the area.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they talk about is, geographically moving that person from the location. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to say taking him from our city and putting him in another city
Yeah.
and be like, hey, get out of here.
Yeah.
But when you remove the person who is committing the violent crimes, whether
Yeah.
that be for a year or 120,
Yeah.
then they no longer have the ability to do that. And our team at the time, we were tracking it had a spreadsheet, and that's the case. It seems like that is an obvious thing. It's the severity of the crime, right? And if we're picking people up for crimes that are not really punishable in a way, like in terms of time, obviously depending on your location, then they're gonna go back and do it again and still be out there probably. So us as well saw the value in that, and we started tracking how much time these people were getting that we were catching in the same situations that you were speaking of, and we had a running sheet of all the years, and it is really fulfilling to look at that. And at this time, this person they definitely did at least one, and we just watched them do another one.
Yeah.
So they had done at least two, but usually it's more than that. And to know that those individuals are actually going to be in prison because they probably deserve to be there, seems like a valuable way to use your resources and your time.
Yeah.
So in January 23rd of 2014, do I have that right? You were a patrol officer, right? And you had been on at that point, 7 years?
Yeah. So like 8, to 6, 7. Yeah, somewhere in there. Just starting out. So enough to where like we always kind of made the joke is like anything past 5 years, usually at the 5-year mark, no matter really where you worked, like you were, you kind of experienced everything. I think in the area where we work, I think it's more like 2.5. So it's a little bit more fast paced, but at that point it was, you're kind of no longer considered rookie status.
Real quick, I want to talk about this. I want to go back real quick before we get into the shooting portion, because we were talking about these cattle on the street and the things that you could experience in a day, and obviously completely dependent on where you worked. I've worked in a small town where maybe a 911 call came in, and if it did, it probably wasn't serious. And then obviously frequently happening in a large metropolitan area. But on that day specifically, we were both working, and you had a ride-along with you, right? Female, how old was she, you think?
She was 32 years old, came down from Chicago, was a graphic designer, like already pretty much set in her career. And I asked her, I was like, what are you doing? And I was like, especially with the political climate the way it is nowadays, it's like we are not very well liked people. Went on throughout the day, handled like a disturbance call and a couple other things, and then finally our last call of the day was around 9:00 at night, and she's just sitting there, and I'm doing like a little report, and I was like, well, it's pretty much it. Like, he's kind of seeing a little bit how a regular day is, and then all of a sudden the call goes out over the radio, cutting just occurred, and I was like 2 minutes from there, and I was just like, how are you with blood? And she's like, I guess I'm gonna have to get used to it. And I was like, all right, muscle up, buttercup, let's roll. And so we just went out there, pulled up on the scene, and Man, she ended up she actually did really well. She helped me translate and things like that, and helped me find some witnesses on the scene, and ended up being really, really chaotic, and it was one where we were able to handle the situation. And here she was, a ride along, and she was just like thrown into the fire, and she did really well. So that's kind of how you learn on this job. It's kind of where you find where you're at.
Yeah. So that call in particular, I got sent that call. I was primary on it, and of course John waited till I got it just to say that he would go over there. But he got there before I did, and that particular street and area is difficult to understand because it seems like none of the complexes are numbered. There's no names, and luckily for me, well, you got there, but I just followed the fire truck, and it took me right to where you were. And like you said, it was chaotic, lots of people around, and I don't speak Spanish, and
Yeah.
it was a problem. And so, what ended up happening was myself and John got separated because I was told the suspect was in a certain location, so I went and found him. And then I got stuck on the scene where the suspect was, and John was at the cutting scene, which turned into a homicide scene. And in my mind, I was thinking, oh, that ride-along really got everything she was looking for today,
Yeah.
a little bit of everything. And when I finally made it back over to where you were, 3 a.m. or whatever that was, we had that discussion about her experiences, and
Yeah.
if she really wanted a taste of what it was look like, she got a pretty good, solid experience. So just wanted to talk about that story real quick, as far as being a newer officer or riding along with another officer and types of things that just may happen in a major metropolitan area where crime is of abundance, we should say.
Yeah.
So again, January 23, 2014, were you with your partner that day?
Yeah, my partner and I, we were riding that day, and that day was bad winter storm blew through there, and it was like probably 8 o'clock at night, getting towards near the end of shift. I remember it was dark, and it was like starting to sleet, and it was just like, man, just nasty cold, wet cold, and so we get a call of a robbery just occurred, and we happened to be just like a minute from there. Start heading that way, and right as we're getting ready to pull into the complex where it happened, luckily our complainant had put out good vehicle information, and he had a good license plate, good description of the vehicle, and description of the suspect, and it was a carjacking. So from there, another unit just happened to be a little ways to the south, and car rolls right in front of them. And I mean, it was probably within like 2 minutes of this robbery occurring. So that all worked out perfectly.
Do you remember the description of the vehicle, or was it a license plate? I mean, the robber stole somebody's car at gunpoint is basically what happened, right?
Yeah.
So it was the complainant's vehicle that the robber was in, and it was in an apartment complex?
Yeah, it was an apartment complex real close there, and it was kind of near a major freeway. And so we were thinking like, okay, maybe he's going to book it towards that freeway. And so, we were kind of putting that information out. And the vehicle I'm wanting to say was like a Toyota Corolla. And I remember it being like dark in color. It was like black or something like that. But that secondary unit, he was the one who found it. And so he's like, hey, I got it. It's rolling. We're coming up. I was like, all right, wait a second. We'll pull up there with you. And I had my female partner. She was riding shotgun. And so I'm driving, and we go right when I catch up to him. I was like, all right, man, we're with you. Go ahead and light it up. And so we initiate the traffic stop and, of course, car chase. But that's where I guess I'd like to give a shout out to our brothers in blue up in the northern states, because I don't know how they do a car chase in the snow or if that's even a thing, but we got to slightly experience it in some, crappy Texas weather. And so it was just one of those where it was like, I felt like we were like doing 100 miles an hour, but really we're only doing like 20, because both our the suspect's tires and our tires were just kind of like, we're just like trying to maintain. And so he goes down to the next major block, tries to make a turn, of course spins out, and as he spins out, he goes up into like kind of the garden / grassy area of like a local gas station. And so I'm just like, okay, well, I'm gonna come in behind him, and I'm gonna pin the vehicle. I'm gonna try to stop him from evading, and continuing evading from us on a motor vehicle. So as I kind of jump the curb and try to get up there to him, like I said, we're all spinning out and everything's wet. And so he gets loose, throws it in reverse. We keep going. Chase only lasted like maybe 5 minutes or so, and then that's when we continued north into a neighborhood. And as we get into the neighborhood, I just remember kind of the rookie. I think he had maybe 3 or 4 years on or something like that, but he spun out in that same grassy area as well. Well, he was a little late on catching up with us, and as he's starting to catch up with us, as we're kind of on a straightaway now, he's like really cooking it, and I'm just like, oh no. And he flies by my passenger side, and it's funny because my partner, she was just super calm, cool, collective. Like everybody said later on, they're like, was she calling the chase from the station, or like what was going on? Because we made the joke. We're like, yeah, she called out. All right, we're going northbound on, Street A, and we're going to be going eastbound, getting ready to go eastbound, stand by. And then, like, all of a sudden, she key up. She's like, what are we doing? It's so snowy. And I'm just like, oh, my God. I was like, stop. And then she's like, all right, going back northbound. And I'm like, so in between the takes, it was chaotic. But then she was able to, kind of like that fast pace, slow it down. And so it was really cool how she was calling it. Well, then this guy was fast paced, full blown. And as he flies by me, catches some snow, or not snow, but sleet, and man, he loses control, starts doing like a 720, and I just remember him coming across in front of me, and then starts to spin out, and I'm just like, oh no, this isn't good. And then he's 360s into a yard and keeps going into a yard of a residence, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's about to go into this house. And then when he wrecks out, Chase still keeps going, but yeah, it is.
When the other officer picked up the vehicle, did he got behind it and he waited for your unit? Did he call it? Did he start lighting it up, or did you guys take primary?
No, so he was ahead of us. So the way we call a chase is that he's essentially the primary unit, but since he's closest to the suspect, all he has to worry about is driving. And then me also lucking out, and that's kind of the benefits of having a two-man unit, is now all I really have to do is worry about driving too, and then we'll let my partner, she called it out.
And when you talked about the vehicles going kind of sliding out or going into that, what is it, a gas station? Or
yeah, it was like a garden area. They kind of decorate the front end of a gas station. That's kind of like a grassy area slid out into.
Were you saying that the officer, the primary officer, kind of spun out and took too long to keep going, and you guys ended up primary, or?
Yeah, so like I said, we were all spinning out, and it just so happened how our cars ended up is, he's kind of on my right side, I'm on his left side, and then suspect was kind of like over like my left side of my bumper on the driver's side of the vehicle, and then it's just kind of the way he reversed and I reversed. Now we switched roles, and now he's trying to play catch up.
And were you saying that the other officer was going too fast?
Oh man!
And he came as you guys were coming to arrest. He came flying by.
No, it was he was. I guess he was wanting to like get back into his spot, being primary, and just with the weather conditions, yeah, he lost control and 360'd into the front yard of a residence.
Was he out of it at that point, or he couldn't continue?
Yeah, he was done. I think there was some major damage done to his vehicle. But I remember we continued the chase, and we just kind of did like a reverse P in the neighborhood. I thought with the way the neighborhood goes, it goes straight out onto the freeway of a major. It goes straight out onto the feeder of a major freeway. And so I was like, oh, dude, he's gonna book it, and then hit the freeway. So I was already putting on the radio, hey, like, units start, like, getting on the freeway and seeing if we can start getting some people to play catch up, because that's kind of the bummer, is that our area, we don't have a lot of backup, don't have a lot of manpower. We kind of experiencing that shortage even back then, and so he actually stays in the neighborhood and he avoids going back onto the feeder. So he like goes back deeper into the neighborhood, and he actually loses control now, and he wrecks out into a residence front yard, and it's only like the next block north of where that first officer wrecked out. So a record driver actually pulled up to check on that officer who first wrecked out. Well, now all of a sudden they hear him, and he comes up and he wrecks out. Well, now he's trying to give him verbal commands and things like that from the other side as he's like coming out of his car, and the guy's actually heading back southbound towards him to dart around a house. And then, man, they start exchanging gunfire.
So you're saying that the record driver happened to be there and pulled up and tried to do something?
Yeah, he was there assisting the officer who wrecked out originally, and then now that we were still in the chase and he comes back around and wrecks out just a block north, then that record driver just happens to be there checking on that officer, and then all of a sudden Crook's running at that that officer, and then now he starts just raising. He brings up a .357 revolver. They start exchanging gunfire. Well, luckily, and it's just kind of one of those things, man. If it happens, learn how to adjust it. And he was able to, but the officer comes up to fire his first round, and it's just a bad round. And we looked at it later on. There was a strike on the primer and everything. He was able to clear it real quick. But once that was going on, and the suspect's already cranking out a couple of rounds, record driver was there, and he has his concealed carry permit. And he just lays down cover fire and just starts releasing hate back towards that suspect. And then that officer was able to clear the malfunction, come back up. They both started exchanging gunfire. At that same time now, I'm hearing all that. We come to a stop where his car came to a stop. And as I'm getting out, I'm seeing him shooting at the officer and the record driver. My partner, she's getting out, getting to a place of cover. And then I just happen to have kind of a straightaway. So I'm going to get a beat on him. And then he darts around the side of a house. So they no longer have eyes on him. They're, kind of maintaining coverage. I run up to the corner, and as I'm running up to the corner of the house, I quick peek it, and I just see it's just like a black alleyway. And so I was just like, okay, not going that way. And it actually, made me think of an officer who was shot and killed in the line of duty previously, kind of the same thing. He was in a foot chase, hot and heavy, wasn't clearing his corners or anything, and the suspect was just waiting right there on the corner and just ambushed him. And so from that, I was like, I'm not doing that.
How close was the proximity of the suspect vehicle? Well, two questions. When the suspect vehicle came back around, did he have to come back that direction, or did he just happen to just kind of make that turn to end up back that way?
Yeah.
Or did the environment, the roads force him to have to do a U-turn or kind of loop back around and end up there? And how close was the suspect's vehicle in proximity to the record driver and the officers when he came out?
So it was just think of a residential block, just from one residential street north to where the suspect wrecked out. But that's why, I was putting it out originally, like, hey, he's heading towards, because if you go through that neighborhood, you can cut through and come out onto the feeder of a major freeway. And I was like, hey, this is where he's going to be going. And then all of a sudden he didn't. And I've realized this now, if you try to get into the heads of a lot of these suspects, you'll drive yourself mad. And it was like, you'll see them, especially doing undercover surveillance and stuff from the tactical teams, you'll just see them do things and you're like, why are they doing that? And sometimes it's just that's just the way they are, man. You don't try to process it. And so that's what he was doing. And in fact, I remember I was like, man, this is going to be like a kid or something, because he was using his blinkers. So everywhere he turned, he would give us a heads up. And I was like, well, at least he's nice in that way.
What is it, 100 feet before the stop?
Yeah, so I was just like, man, why's this dude using his blinkers? And everywhere but I guess, it's just one of those things. Adrenaline's running, you're caught up in it. And but I remember he just used his blinker to turn away from the feeder, and he just came back into the neighborhood, and I was just like, well, okay.
Did you say what the distance was roughly?
Yeah, so from where he wrecked out to the officers on the south, it was just, like I said, like a residential block. So just kind of think of just one little east-west cross street, and you go down another block and to the south, and another east-west cross street. So maybe there was two houses, so the length of two houses from where he wrecked out to where the officer wrecked out. And then he ran just on the east side of that north-south residential street, just 2 or 3 houses. And then that's when he gets engaged from the record driver and from the officer. And then they have their little tit for tat there. And then he darts off, and that's when I, sprint up to the corner and check it. And I'm like, okay.
Where the suspect wrecked out, were the vehicles, could you see both the suspect's vehicle and the record driver's vehicle?
Yeah, you could see... yeah, but pretty much it was just maybe, I'd say straight away is I'd say probably 40 yards maximum. But I mean, he was closing distance, and that's from car to car. So he was closing that distance, so maybe 30 yards, 25 yards.
Was it the environment that was forcing him to run that direction? It seems like you would run away from people.
And that's what threw me off too.
Maybe he didn't see the police car?
That's what I'm thinking, is that he might have just saw the record, because the police car was definitely deep up into the front yard. And so he might have only saw that wrecker. Because I didn't really think about that. Because now looking back on it, there was like an open field to the left. If he would have like darted more left, but I guess he just didn't see it. Probably because of the way he kind of crashed and stuff. He just got out and ran along that line of houses, and then that's when I guess he probably saw the car and stuff. But.
And so at the time you're pulling up, hearing the gunfire being exchanged, are you seeing it too?
Yeah, I remember seeing like his last round, and I just remember seeing the flash, and I was just like, "What has this guy got?" And I don't remember seeing the weapon or anything like that, but I just saw the flash, and I was like, "This dude's got a hand cannon."
Are you pulling up behind him? He's facing away from you?
Yeah, so he wrecked out on an east-west street facing east, and then I was like basically just 5 yards just north of him, and just kind of came to a stop there as well. And so when I got out of my car and ran back around chasing him on foot pursuit south, and then that's when, kind of by the time I'm settling and throwing it in park and getting all that situated, that's when I'm hearing like kind of the last bit of that first volley of gunfire.
And so you see him at the point where he disappears behind our side of the house, right? Mm-hmm. And, when we're chasing after people, just in general, the officer who's running after the person is trying to make that not necessarily a split-second decision, but make a decision based on how far away he is from the suspect when he disappeared, the speed at which they're running, and all this stuff, and considering whether or not, how much time do you need to now spend at this corner to make sure he isn't right here, or whatever other factors there might be. So when you get to that first, you took the same path that he did, mm-hmm. and right, and so when you get to the first corner of that house, did you feel like I need to assess this real quick? Or were you kind of like in the mode of like running after him to try and still kind of get him?
Yeah, because that's where like I never did any extracurricular training or anything like that. It was essentially just like what the academy put us through, like patrol wise. So I was never even trained on how to like slice a pie on a corner or anything like that. I don't even remember if I had to have my gun out because I remember I was bringing a beat up on him, but I just remember checking it with a flashlight, and I just remember like quick peeking that with a flashlight, and I was just like, oh no way, dude, because like when I turned the flashlight off, it was like pitch black, and I just remember like
didn't see him.
Yeah, I didn't see him. Quick peeked it, and it was like from the front side corner to the backyard corner of a residence, so it wasn't like a long distance. But I just remember seeing like it was heavy vegetation all up and down like a chain link fence about waist high, so about 4 foot or so, and then. I just, saw it, and I was like, no, I'm not running back there because, I thought of that other officer, and I was just like, I'll just take the long route because there's only 3 of us essentially still in this chase. So I just yelled back. I was like, I'm going around, and I just took off running, and I ran another block to the east, and then one more kind of half block. It was like kind of one of those little cul-de-sacs that's like directly off a main street. So it was just kind of like right there, a little bubble. So I ran all the way down, ran all the way back on that side, and I was like, this is about as good enough as a perimeter as we're going to get right now. And so I just sat there, and I just remember like hearing the tinking of the sleet. I was hiding behind a AC unit, took a knee back there, and I just remember hearing that, and I'm just like, this is terrible. Because at that point, I'm like, I don't see anything. I have no, other than where I last saw him, that was kind of my roundabout direction of travel. So I know he ran east, and so then I went 1 block south, ran east, and then came back to the north kind of. And then I just remember looking back into that backyard, and it was essentially like a 4 square of just chain link fences and neighboring yards all together. So it was a pretty open, grassy area. There was no other cover. There was no other, buildings or anything like that back there. So I was like, I'm just going to wait here.
So when you first got to the corner and you did your quick peek with the light and you realized he wasn't there, or it was too dark, there was nothing driving you in a certain direction to tell you I feel safe moving through here, yeah. Or I can at least move through here in some tactical way, like where you're in giving yourself the best chances possible. Did you hear anything, chains moving, trees, trash cans, anything that even alerted you of where he could have gone at that point?
No, I don't remember hearing anything. I just remember that's the way he's running. And I just remember like there was just a narrow, alleyway between fence and the side of the garage or the side of the house. And I was just like, that just doesn't, like I said, I've never taken any extra training at that point, and so I was just like, this just doesn't feel right. So I just decided to book it and try to run around.
And I think that that's an important training point. Something that you did well is, I talk about taking necessary risk versus unnecessary risk, and that seems like a situation where it's you against this one guy, right?
Yeah.
Nobody else has been hurt at this point. It's not an active shooter hostage rescue thing. So doing what you can to increase your chances of survival in that moment, looking down there and saying, yeah, this doesn't look right, doesn't feel right. And just in general as a cop, and cops have been killed in this way, like you mentioned, running blindly around corners without any direction of where the person went, nothing driving you, telling you, okay, I can hear dogs barking 2 houses over, pretty sure he's over there now because they weren't, right? And just decided to try and keep everything in front of you, which is a great, practice to do at all times. Obviously, what makes CQB dangerous is that you're stepping into essentially a defensive position in an environment that is really 360, but as you're doing it and moving around, that's what you're trying to do, is keep everything in front of you. So I assume when you're in this police car, a Crown Vic, I believe, probably.
Yeah, old school Crown Vics.
So when you're in this car and you're doing whatever you do before you get the call, I assume you're pretty toasty in there, right?
Oh,
It's not toasty outside. So you're probably in the car feeling pretty toasty. You're in a vehicle pursuit, so your adrenaline is going up a little bit. Your heart's, going. The good thing about having a partner is that it alleviates some of that, stress, whether implied or actual, in terms of you focus on the driving, she focuses on calling it, and truly your attention is to stop signs, stop lights, other traffic, how fast you're going, trying to understand the capabilities of your vehicle, hopefully. And obviously that showed kind of in the other officers, ability to kind of keep it under control. Obviously, environmental factors are sometimes something you can't necessarily plan for per se. But her having the ability to focus on the radio and call it out probably allowed you the opportunity to be able to put yourselves in a position to even come to a stop safely and keep everything in front of you up to that point. So you're toasty, you're in the car, and now you're out of the car, right? But you just saw a shooting happening, right? Or heard it or whatever. And so you get out of the car, you're probably still a little toasty, right?
Yeah.
You're probably still a little toasty, and you're running up to that corner. And at this point, you're probably not really thinking about or feeling the environmental factors because there's just other things going on in your mind. And, I'll ask you, but about the time when you run around and you do all the things that you do and say, this is pretty much it, this is all I can do, just stand right here and try and keep him inside of a perimeter. How long before, we'll get to the next part, but were you standing there before something happened? Because the longer you stand there, you start to come off of that little bit of adrenaline, and especially in the cold weather, if you've never been on the range or trained in cold weather, it's a whole nother thing. And I don't think you can necessarily train to it unless you are consistently putting yourself in there and you're habituating yourself to being comfortable in cold. But more as like in terms of maybe if you're in a southern state and it's always hot, just understanding what the cold weather actually does to you, because it really does diminish your abilities to be able to do anything. And not only that, from a physical perspective with your hands and all of those fine motor skills, but also mentally, psychologically standing there, right? You're seeing all these things happen, you're hyped up, and then like, oh, it's been 10 minutes and it's like, I kind of want to get back to the car,
Yeah, especially like when I started hearing the sleet fall, that's when I was kind of like, that's not normal. Like, especially in Texas, you're just like, what is this stuff? So I was just, I took a knee behind a AC unit and just kind of, and probably like 2 minutes had gone by from the time I kind of like get to my area and I settle, and then like another minute goes by, maybe 2 minutes of me sitting there, and I'm just kind of like, this is brutal. Because I mean, luckily I had long sleeve, and I had a long sleeve Under Armour under that, so I wasn't like, wind wasn't cutting through me or anything. But just sitting there, and I think, looking back on it, I think that was the driving factor for the suspect as well. If I'm wanting to say, he was in like a short sleeve and like shorts. Like, so I'm just kind of sitting there, radio's chirping, everybody's talking about where they need to go, how they need to set up a perimeter and things like that. And I'm kind of slightly coordinating from there. And while I'm doing that, then all of a sudden I start hearing a chain link fence, and I look up, and then I see him jumping the chain link fence, but it's like he gets caught up in it or something, and like I said, it's only like waist high fence or so, but he gets caught up in it, and then he falls, and I see him fall, and so I start giving verbal commands when I actually, I'm hearing stuff, seeing stuff, and then now all of a sudden I see him, and then boom, he falls, and I jump up from my position of cover, and I'm starting to give verbal commands from there, and I just see him reach to the small of his back, and he starts yelling back some curse words that gave me the mindset of, okay, this guy isn't really wanting to give up.
Are you seeing all this happen from the corner of the other house now? You had come around, but now you're standing at the corner, so you're hearing this, and are you also seeing this happen from there, or did you have to move in order to see what was happening?
It was like I said, it was a wide open backyard area, and I didn't run out into the middle of it or anything, but I just probably took like 2 steps to the left of this AC unit to like really kind of be like, okay, what's going on in front of me? Because I'm hearing it, and it's all this rustling and everything, vegetation, and then hearing the metal of the fence, and then that's when I finally pinpoint him, and I see him, and when he comes over, he lands, and that's when I start giving verbals, and as he stands back up, I remember there was a garage light off of a neighboring yard, or a garage, off the neighbors, and shining light onto the yard. When I see him, I'm able to kind of see the shadow and stuff of him reaching. That's when I was like, oh, okay, and then he's yelling back some curse words, and that's all. I was like, oh, this guy isn't giving up. And then with him reaching, I just, from that position, for whatever reason, I have no idea why, but I took like 3 or 4 more steps forward just to kind of close distance, take a knee. And at the time, like I said, I've never taken any kind of extracurricular training. I was just a regular old patrol cop, and didn't even have a weapon-mounted light. And I just take a knee, and then fired off my first round. And then it was just like, the volley was pretty much like boom, 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 as he's running along a wooden fence, kind of towards that light. So I had, at least he was illuminated. And then the whole time, I just remember he was like running, reaching into the small of his back. And so by the 3rd round, he falls. And then once he falls, like I said, looking back on it, I'm like, with the knowledge I have now, I'm like, why did I close distance? But I did just, ran up another 10 yards or so, and then I just remember him scooting back, and still hand was in the small of his back, kind of like at a one arm kind of parade rest, right hand was behind, and he's scooting back, and I'm just like, this dude's gonna pull a gun at any second. So I just start hammering down, and then from there he just kind of stayed like that. And I was able to address the threat and handle it, and then when he stayed like that, and the hand still on the small of his back, and then I was able to tell everybody else where I was at.
You said something was a driving factor for the suspect as well. You were talking about the weather. What was it about the weather that you think was a driving factor in terms of the suspect?
I'm thinking that since he was in shorts and everything, and I'm just sitting there after a couple of minutes, and he's been in the elements for about a minute longer than me or so, just kind of realizing like, I'm not, like I'm trying to get in his mindset, but I'm thinking he's probably like, I'm not going to be able to sit here and hide, or else I'll freeze to death. And just with him being there like that, I think that drove him to essentially get up and move and try to get out of that area.
He maybe was thinking he can't sit there. He has to keep moving, to try and, stay warm, but also maybe it's factored into if he knows that if he stays there, he might not be able to hide quietly, at least for a considerable period of time. But also, too, just in suspects in general, they pretty much, unless they feel like they have to stop, they're probably going to try and keep going as their own tactic. It's human nature just to get away, keep getting away, keep going. So when you said that you were at the back of the AC unit, or you were at the corner of the house, I assume you were at the back of the house, and that's when you sidestepped over. And you talked about weapon light. You didn't have one. You had a handheld light, and at the time, though, in the academy or after, I mean, I don't really know what was going on in terms of policing and gear and equipment at that time. Was it were you allowed to per the policy? Was it just something that maybe wasn't a discussion at the time? Or were they actually training it and allowing people to do it?
Yeah, I think they had just started releasing the policy, or there was rumblings on it, or something right around that time. Because shortly after that, I ended up taking kind of one of the first classes that they put on, as far as like a low light weapon mounted light. And it was just kind of like one of their beginning courses of like how they're going to kind of teach it thing, I think. And so that's where, I mean, I didn't even know anything about like, if you get a weapon mounted light, that means you need a new holster. And it's like, okay. And so that's also another thing that, and I get where officers' mindset is at, but as far as like money wise, like, oh, okay, I'm buy this $100 light. And then they're like, oh, wait, it doesn't fit in my regular holster. So that means I got to buy another $200 holster. And it's just like, okay, well, and then, looking back on it now, being involved in these situations, I'm like, dude, it's worth the money. Cause it's like, this is stuff that now I've heard officers say, it's like, buy equipment that you're willing to risk your, have your life depend on it. And so that's what I was like, okay, this is worth it. And unfortunately, I had to experience that. Luckily, I came out on top, but it was a severe tactical disadvantage. And luckily, I also had the garage light illuminate my suspect. So,
and I money and policing, you're going to end up, especially if you're into these kinds of things, you're going to end up spending a bunch of money on stuff that doesn't work anyway. I mean, you're going to have a box full of things that thought would be good and it's not, or it doesn't work, doesn't fit, whatever the case is. But having a good weapon light and buying a holster that works with the light is just something that you have to do. And basically by not doing it, you are essentially under stress, dedicating yourself to shooting one-handed. And how far away was he from you?
I'd say it's probably 15, 20 yards on a running target.
And so you were shooting one-handed, or no, you were using two hands, but you had the light is why you were able to.
Yeah. So that's what I just, had the light, and I saw him. And so, I'm, looking at it, I was, trained in how to shoot one-handed, with a light in your flashlight in your hand and things like that. It's just, I'd never really thought about it, especially never really done it that much since, training. I mean, since the academy. So it was just one of those, was like, if you don't ever do it, you're going to lose that skill set. And it was just, like I said, luckily that light was there, that garage light.
So did you actually have your flashlight in your hand? Did you drop it? Was it in your pocket? Or?
Yeah, so after I engaged the suspect, and I actually had to do a reload, and I just remember thinking, like, these guys are zombies. Like, they never die. And so I was like, dude, you couldn't have. I would love to have seen a video and put myself on the timer, because that was probably the fastest reload I've ever done in my life. But I was just like, did a reload real quick, and then I came back up and I assessed the target, and then I assessed him, and he's just like, no longer moving. And I'm just like, okay, threat's down. And then I remember, I'm like, oh, well, they don't really know where I'm at. And I asked other officers later on, and they were like, yeah, man, we heard you on the radio, like, hey, I got him running over here. And then we just hear a barrage of gunfire. And they were like, we didn't know if it was him shooting at you or both y'all or whatever. And they were like, so we were freaking out. And so that's why I grabbed my flashlight off my belt. I still had it on my belt, and I just kick it on a strobe mode, and I just had it behind me. So I was still covering down on him, and I just held it behind me, in my left hand, pointing back towards, I know where officers were, just on the other side of this house, hoping that maybe they jumped into the backyard or something. They see my strobe or whatever. So I just maintained coverage on him, and it wasn't until my sergeant finally, and it was, I guess everybody got caught up on this same fence, because I'm just hearing officers, metal clinking, and then poof, and then like getting up and running back over there to me, and then my sergeant finally comes up, and he was just like, all right, Calhoun, you're good. And that's what, because I was still like, all right, dude, like, and then I was waiting for somebody to kind of go like, contact cover on him or something, and try to put him in cuffs. But my sergeant looked at it and was like, you're good, man, holster up. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like,
right. I think, I've been guilty of this. Every cop has been guilty of this in tactical situations of getting themselves too close. And what it is it's a physiological response to stress that's making you feel like you need to push up. And I've been not yelled at, but in operation during a takedown critiqued, get back. And so the reason that I talk about these things, whether you see it on the Instagram or whatever, is not because I am, the best at doing all of these things or haven't made these mistakes. It's just so that we can kind of bring them to light, and hopefully you can prevent yourself from making those mistakes. Because when I made the mistakes, when John made the mistakes, it wasn't the end of the world because everything worked out. But you could make that mistake one time, and that could be the last time you make a mistake ever again.
Yeah.
So taking a knee first to engage him, you said, "Oh, I've never really done that," right? And that's a physiological response, not issue, but thing happening, like, oh, get small, and let me try and get this guy. And I believe you said what you had told me is that you believe your first 2 rounds missed, and then your third round is the one that hit.
Yeah. So I went back later on and I looked at the wooden picket fence that was behind it. It's like one of those 6 foot tall wooden fences, and there was 2 holes, spaced out, pretty even height, maybe like 4 or 5 feet up, and then the third one I could never find. So I'm assuming that's what made him fall. And then from there, like I said, he was constantly facing me, scooting back, hand in the small of his back. So I'm like, any second this dude's gonna draw on me. And so I just kept hammering on it until he finally stopped moving.
The point to be made here is that what it sounds like you did in the moment where you decided, I'm in fear of serious bodily injury or death at this point, and you decided to take your shots in the way that you've explained them to me, is like you were actually putting in an effort to shoot at the suspect, while the suspect was also not an easy target to hit, right? And so at the cadence in which you explain, like bang, 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 it that tells me that you are shooting within your capabilities on a difficult target and trying to land hits, versus shooting a lot and shooting fast at 20 yards on a moving target. Probably going to miss a lot more. You might hit them, maybe even sooner.
Yeah.
But a lot of those rounds are going to be unaccounted for. So that's really good. And then you talked about how people didn't know where you were. And that's, I would say, a common issue and something that can be avoided. If you don't know the area that you work, that's like the first thing you got to do. Yeah. And not that you didn't know that, but it's one thing to know, but another thing to remember to let people know. So you probably shouldn't be, doing traffic stops, trying to get into a vehicle pursuit if you don't even know the directions or you don't know the streets. I mean, GPS, use a GPS if you can. Obviously, those are great. They work. And it's also one thing to say, I'm in the 100 block of, Brown Street. That lets everybody know where you're at, but it's also just more beneficial to you as the officer to be able to not only know the actual location of where you are, but understand where you're at in relation to everything else around you. Because the 100 Brown Street will get people to you, but it's not necessarily going to help you make other decisions or put other cops in other places, because you only know where you physically are and don't know the actual makeup. Just keep that in mind. You got to know where you're at all times. And one way, simple, easy way, is landmarks. And I'm not saying that this is something that factored into you, but a lot of times you can, like the McDonald's. Okay, there's one McDonald's in your whole area. People know where that is. Heading towards the main street, if people know you're in the neighborhood or whatever that is, you can use other things to, heading towards the bayou or whatever. You can use other things to let people know where you are without actually knowing the direction of travel. And it's important because if you need help and people don't know where you're at, you're not going to get the help.
Yeah.
Or you will if it gets there in time, but otherwise maybe you won't. So another thing about cold weather gear, and this is my philosophy on this, and if you're watching this on the video, you could see I'm wearing just like this long sport black shirt, and this is what I would wear in our weather when it is cold. I don't wear a jacket because I don't plan on being, moving from my car to the call or whatever, but also those things can inhibit your ability to be able to fight. Yeah. And if you are wearing a jacket that you don't intimately know how to work around it with your gear, that's an issue, right? It can cause you to not be able to get to your holster, cause you to not be able to get to your radio, or you're covering up your radio and you're trying to communicate, but it's so loud because all people are hearing is the scuffle of your jacket. That's a problem. Can't get to your magazine. So if you're going to wear that stuff, you have to know its capabilities. And obviously, if you're working in Alaska or something, it's a little bit different. You're going to have to probably wear something a little bit thick, but the same rules still apply. So you moved up on the suspect. And I guess your critique on that is when he went down, you probably would have held at the corner of the house, cover on him, and let people know where you were. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much like looking back on it, and with the more advanced training that I've gone through now over the years, it was like, why did I do that? And I know why. I mean, my mindset's always been kind of default aggressive. Like, like I'm always kind of like, okay, I'm just, if on the street, if somebody's charging at me and they're like, man, you got a problem with me, and they're balling up their fists, and I'm like, clearly this person's aggressive. Well, I'm going to meet you halfway because you're going to need all your strength.
I'm not saying I haven't seen that.
So it's like, if it looks like there's a fight that's about to go down, then I'm ready to throw down. And so that's why I think, looking back on it, it was like, you just shot at my friends, and that's not polite. And so we're going to talk about it. And so now looking back on it, that could have cost me, like, that, because I think the only form of cover I had back there was like a banana leaf. And it was just like, why did I do that?
Yeah.
Like I said, it's, you learn from your mistakes, try to make them few and far between, and try to not make them where they're permanent.
That individual himself was no longer capable of committing any more robberies after that point.
Yeah.
And I believe you got an award of some sort, or?
Yeah, so I got a hostile engagement award, and that was like my first one, and then ended up getting some other awards from like our police union and things like that, and for both me and my partner. Like my partner, she did outstanding job as far as coordinating everything. Prior up to that, I just kind of got on the radio and was like, hey, I'm running around to the backyard. And then that's why everybody was kind of like, what backyard are you in, or whatever. Like, they knew I was somewhere back there, but they didn't know, like I said, there's several adjoining yards and things like that. So my partner did an excellent job calling the chase. So we both got some awards from that, and but nothing too crazy until later on.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to support Kinetic Concepts and Surviving the Street podcast, you can reach me on Instagram, Kinetic Concepts _group, and you can find more content on the YouTube channel, Kinetic Concepts _group. If you're looking for training in Texas or elsewhere, head over to kineticconceptsgroup.com and subscribe to the website to be notified for upcoming training. If you're looking to schedule training for your department, send me an email at instructors@kineticconceptsgroup.com.
118, tell this my family hello. I can't copy. I want family hello. We got crews coming.